Good morning, everyone. My name is Leni Andronicos, for those of you that don't know me. I'm really excited today to be talking to you about startup marketing. A little bit about me. I am a marketing consultant. I specialize in working with tech startups. I come from Australia, but I've been living in Stockholm for the last 3 years now, working with some pretty amazing startups that you have here. But before I talk too much about myself, I would love to know who's here. I've already seen some of you starting to introduce yourselves in the chat. Nice to have you here, and please continue to introduce yourselves to each other and to me in the chat, and don't be afraid to, of course, drop any questions as I'm going. I really want to make this session as interactive as possible. And please also let me know if you're a startup founder, what your startup is and what stage of the company you're at. I know we have a lot of early stage founders with us today, so I've built the presentation around that. But please do let me know, and I'm going to kick off. Also, if you are a startup founder or part of a founding team, please screenshot my slides as I'm going. I've tried to make them as thorough as possible so you can really take away this material and perhaps do your own workshop with your team in your own time. But a little bit more about me. I've been working with some pretty amazing startups in Stockholm. The tech scene here is just pretty incredible. I've been working with Readly, the media tech startup here, music tech platform Amuse, ed tech startup Strawbees, Furhat Robotics, Urban Ears, Logcast, and Spotify needs no introduction. So I've had a pretty epic 3 years here, and really looking forward to meeting hopefully some more of you. I'm going to try and do the almost impossible task of consolidating perhaps a month's worth of work with a startup of building their marketing strategy into 15 minutes today. So I'm going to whiz right through. But as I said, please screenshot as I'm going and really take this material and do your own workshops as you please. So I'm going to kick off by talking you through the 4 key strategic ingredients of a marketing strategy for startups in 2020. This generally is one of the first things I will say to a startup CEO or founder, someone really navigating their first marketing strategy. The first one is what I like to call peeling back the polish. So what we're really starting to see from startups is a need to adapt to a more show me what your brand is approach. It's actually very similar to what we've seen with influencers who have offered a full insight into their lives. Brands really need to now follow suit. They need to start peeling back the polish and offering a complete 360 view into their brand, their people, their culture, and their values. I'm sure this is no surprise to a lot of founders in this chat, but building in public is really important in 2020. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later on as well. The next strategic ingredient is about brand intimacy. So really, you need to be focusing on building an intimate relationship with your consumers. So really bringing them into your brand and giving them access to you like they've never had before. If you invite them to be part of your journey from the early stages, they're more likely to stay with you as you grow, as your company grows and as they grow as a consumer as well. So it should be all about collaboration, innovation, learning, and sharing. We're also starting to see a really interesting, and this is probably one of my favorites, a new wave of co-creation. So it's about open customers and actually letting them co-create the future of your brand with you. This helps you become more of an important part of their lives, more than just using your service or buying your product. They will actually start to think more deeply about you. And what I always say to founders actually is that your people and your customers and your super users are going to be your cheapest marketing tool. So bring them on board. And we'll talk a little bit later as well about building community and how you can really get them to think more deeply about you. Lastly, is all about social proof. So again, no surprises, but your customers are likely to be trusting content that has been created by one of their peers, someone they trust in their network, more so than material coming from a brand. So when you're thinking about developing content for your marketing strategy or your content campaigns, you should really actually start to think about using user-generated content as much as possible. So leveraging the real stories of your super users, your customers, instead of the old way of doing things, maybe using agencies to create this more polished brand produced creative, use the stories of your people. And actually, I think one of the best things that's come out of COVID-19 from a marketing point of view is that people are more willing to share their stories. So really leverage that and tell your brand story through the lens of them as well. Now I'm going to talk to you about how to develop your brand. Again, this is really focused for early stage startups, or perhaps a startup that is interested in doing a bit of a rebrand. And then we're going to talk a little bit about purpose and how you can develop that as well. The biggest mistake I see first-time founders or startup teams do is get right into developing the physique of their brand. And what I mean by that is things like logos, social media channels, colors, brand look and feel. But before you can actually get into developing the physique of your brand, it's really important that you can understand what is your personality, what is your culture, what kind of relationship do you want to be creating with your super users. So when I say personality, this is really how your brand and your startup shows and expresses itself to the outside world. How can you be authentic and relatable? How can you be fun and have a personal touch? It's really important that you also stay inspirational. So how can you remain contemporary and current? And also be unexpected. Use interesting contrast to create a dynamic tension with your users. When I talk about culture, this is really about defining how your brand behaves in terms of values, principles, and behavior. Do you play by the rules? This is an interesting one. There's a couple of startups in Stockholm that absolutely do not play by the rules. And again, this is really that dynamic tension that I'm talking about. It's a lot more fun, and it's easier to drive an unfair share amount of attention to you when you don't play by the rules. So think about that. Also, what emotional values do you play on as a brand? They can be your own emotional values, or which emotional values of your customer you play on. When thinking about building your relationship, it's all about creating a really good chemistry with your users. How do you speak to them? Are you friendly and emotional? Do you offer them a sense of community? How do you want them to feel when they use your product? And what makes them a super fan? Then we start talking about reflection. So we all know that obviously there is one key persona that your brand is associated with. Yes, you might talk to a number of different personas, but there really is one key person. So who is that person, and how do we want to speak to them? And then lastly, it's all about self-image. So this is how your customers see their ideal selves. Do they use your product to actually improve their life? Perhaps you're a fintech startup, you offer banking solutions, or is it something that actually improves how they feel in their life? It's really important to figure out the difference between those. Once you do nail that, that's what you build your messages around. And you really want your consumers to see themselves as part of your brand or your startup. Once you've sat down and you've actually defined each of those 5 things, that's when we can get to developing the physique of your brand. So what is your brand visual elements? Are they design? Are they logo? Are they colors? What is your social media? What are your content pillars? But before you get to that physique, it's really important that you nail down these 5 pillars of developing your brand. So I hope you did take a screenshot of some of that, and you can take that away and do that in your own time with your team. The next section here I really want to talk about is purpose. And I mean, I don't know how many people are here from Sweden. I would assume a lot, but Swedish people and Swedish startups really have purpose built into the DNA of their brands. So you do a really fantastic job here. Typically, the advice that I would give for this year and looking forward to 2021 is actually asking, are we useful as a brand? Perhaps previously in the last couple of years, it's been more about what do we stand for, but 2020 and 2021 is really about us useful as a brand. So when you're starting to think of your brand purpose and workshopping what you want to be doing, the 2 main steps that you need to think of. The first is identifying what society really needs most right now, and then identifying how your product or your service can actually serve that. There's a really fantastic quote that I love from a good friend of mine who is the author of Good is the New Cool, Afdal Aziz. If you have not read the book, I highly recommend. Please get it. But something that Afdal likes to say a lot is treat people as citizens, not consumers. So when doing a lot of purpose-driven work, really think about how you can apply that. Next, I'm going to talk you through the 4 stages of a marketing strategy. And before I get into this, it's really important that we remember that these should not be living in silos. You should be flighting the material actually together, because no matter what point that your customer is at in their buying cycle with your brand or your product or your service, it's really important that we start to speak to them at every stage and hold their hand throughout the entire buying process. So when I split these out into 4 sections, just remember that we actually need to be creating content and marketing material that speaks to every stage of this journey. So the first phase is all about awareness, and I don't mean driving awareness of your brand or your product. What I actually mean is building awareness of the problem that your customer is facing and how your solution works in the context of that problem. So in this phase, you should try and keep your content educational or entertaining. I like to call it edutainment. And use your content pillars to really start a natural conversation with your audience. The 2 channels that I recommend for startups who are flighting awareness content is with influencers and also with earned media. So how can you generate noise and public interest amongst PR and media about your brand and about your customer's problem? Phase 2 is research. So this is the stage where you really start to build as much awareness as possible about all of your capabilities as a product. This really is about helping your buyer get a vision for how they can achieve their goals. So all your messages in phase 2 should be constructed around their goals. We really need to make the buyer the hero in this stage. The 3 channels that I would recommend to a startup flighting content in this phase would be long form SEO content. It would be partnerships with some like-minded brands, and also focusing on getting the message out on your own channels, because at this stage, a user is likely to be researching on your own platform. So think about your website blog, potentially your Medium page. Phase 3 is evaluation. This is where we really help customers through their evaluation process. So we also shouldn't be afraid here. I always say this. Don't be afraid to actually help them evaluate your competitors as well. One of my clients, Amuse, they are a music distribution service. They do a fantastic job of this. They actually have really fair comparison content that they flight on social media and also on their website as well. So don't be afraid to mention or actually help them evaluate competitors here. And I would do that through your blog and through your own channels as well. So social media, your website, it could be a Medium blog as well. The last stage here is commitment, and then I'm going to move over to the chat window and look at some of your questions. But by the time a user gets to this final stage of your marketing campaign or your strategy, the deal is 85% done by this stage. So how can you actually help the customer overcome that final barrier? Focus on the reasons they say no, and also look at your existing data that you have from previous clients or existing users. What were the purchase triggers that actually helped them convert? I've put in here the Uber case. They did a really great job in the early stages of their product, where they identified that it took someone taking 3 rides for them to love Uber and love the service and be hooked. So what they did is focus their marketing on an offer, which was 100 SEK off for your first 3 rides. And all comms through email marketing, social media, retargeting was around driving that offer. So this is really important in a final stage. Identify that purchase trigger and then build your marketing around that. You can do that through email marketing, you could do paid social retargeting, and of course, offers. Cool. I'm going to actually jump over to the chat now and see what you guys are talking about. Wow, a lot of questions coming through. maybe let's take it at the end. I've got a bit of a Q&A session at the end, so please keep them coming through. This is something that I talk about, and it will probably make any product owners in this presentation happy, but we can actually start to learn a lot from lean product development techniques. Instead of going all in, and I know this is, you know, as a startup founder, it is your baby, and the first time you go to market, you really do want to make a bang. I understand that, but it's very dangerous to actually wait until you have this huge multi-channel campaign perfected and ready to go. You've got the media spend. It's actually a very dangerous way of doing things. What I recommend is actually to do what's called a minimum viable campaign. So taking very small chunks of content, of messaging, creative, finding what sticks, and then accelerating that. So take some learnings from your product teams in your startup, ask them for some of their techniques and how they iterate, and then apply that to your marketing in a series of smaller and more targeted data-driven campaigns. That's one tip. My second most important tip is about building community. And I don't just mean like social media communities, I mean really intimate communities with your super fans. So there are 4 key ways that a startup would benefit from focusing on building communities. You have stronger customer loyalty, you have a better, more intimate relationship with your users, you have increased word of mouth marketing. As I said, your super users and your super fans are going to be your cheapest conversion tool. And of course, you have a better product. At the end of the day, if you bring them into your product decisions, whether you have a feature roadmap that you review with them, or you release a poll and you get their votes for a different UI, mock-ups, whatever it may be, if you bring your super users in now, ultimately you will have a better product. So a couple of tips for how to build maybe your first community. I would focus on one specific persona. As I said, you obviously have maybe 4 or 5 personas that your brand would speak to on a whole, but for you to be able to build the best community, I would recommend focusing on one. Also involve this community in your company, build in public, as we say. As I said earlier, start to share mock-ups with them. Can you launch a product poll in Slack or Telegram? Gather feature requests. I mean, put a call out or send them an email asking what feature they're just desperate for. If you start to involve them in your product roadmap, you're going to have a better product at the end of the day. In terms of content, so what I mean by that is what type of content to start publishing in these communities. I would focus on educational or entertaining content that sparks conversation. And this doesn't just need to be content to do with your brand or your product or even your industry. What are the things that sit alongside your user? What are the other things they're interested in? So I would share relevant news articles, potentially do a Q&A with your team, get your CEO to jump on WhatsApp and start speaking with your super users. It's really cool. For a super user to be able to have access like that to your founding team. You could also maybe hand over your Slack channel to an influencer in the community. They could be a technology influencer, they could be a big VC that you're working with. Start to think of your brand as a publisher, like a media publisher. What are these different pieces of content that would actually your users would find really interesting? So start to think about that rather than just pushing your own brand comms. And I've put in some ideas for starting your first community there. So starting a Slack channel for your early super users. Potentially you might have a first version of your app if you have a mobile app on test flight, which, you know, 1,500 users is generally the cap. Can you invite them all to be part of your Slack channel? Let them talk to each other and suggest things to your founding team. Create a private group on WhatsApp, as I said, and invite these people in. And then lastly, just quickly, I'm super out of time, is influencers. And I don't just mean the influencers that you might see on Instagram or Facebook. Influencers are your clients, they're your employees, they're industry thought leaders, your peers. the reason you need to be working with these people, and I heard someone else say in their session, the Trojan horse strategy, it's actually a way to inject your brand into their community. It's really so easy, and it can actually be done at no cost as well. So think about different content you could be doing with influencers in your network and let them inject your brand into their community. Here's just 6 tips. Please screenshot and take these away with you. Don't focus on like single burst influencer campaigns. Build a long-term relationship with them. Make sure they share values with your brand, and choose influencers that you can culture jack. And what I mean by that is you find someone that has a really great culture or community around them and leverage them to build the trust and culture of your startup. That's actually a very easy and quick way to build culture around your brand. It also could be done with a like-minded brand, another startup, maybe that's not a competitor but has similar user base. How can you leverage their brand and their community to build your own? All right, that is it from me, guys. I'm going to hand over to maybe a little bit a Q&A for 1 minute there, but otherwise here's my contact details. Please send me an email if you have a question. I'd be happy to help you guys. Follow me on Twitter as well. You can DM me any questions you might have. Let me just check out. From Peter, what tips would you give a B2B marketer? Honestly, LinkedIn is a huge tool here, and I would, so I'd focus your media buyers on LinkedIn if you're a B2B. Also follow the Trojan horse strategy, as I said. So if maybe your clients are high net worth, like C-suite executives, or it's a medium to large enterprise, find the people in their networks that they trust and create content with them. So that's something that I do really often with a lot of my higher valued B2B product clients is, you know, if we want to get the product into Amazon, or we want to get the product into Google, how can we actually leverage those C-suite leaders and start to maybe publish some content with them, an interview with them, a video series with them? It goes back to the whole Trojan horse strategy. So I'd focus on leveraging peers for B2B. What would you do, from Sophie? What would you do as your first marketing initiative if you are just beginning your marketing? Good question. If you're just beginning your marketing, I'm probably thinking that you have limited budget. Perhaps if you've not done marketing before, maybe your CEO of your startup might be a little bit cautious. Generally, I find CEOs don't so much believe in ROI of marketing and would be a little bit hesitant to give away budget. So start to do things that don't cost a lot. And that's generally content marketing. So I would focus on content marketing as an early stage startup, focus on your blog, getting down your SEO strategy, producing long form guides, and also creating things with peers in the networks of your customers as well, like I said. So do interviews with super users or interviews with influencers in your category, and just start publishing them on social media, because those people that you interview or feature in your content will share it amongst their network. So really it's like a free media buy for you, because you'll start to get reach from them sharing their content. So focus on content marketing if you are very early in your marketing strategy. Cool. Okay, but please, as I said, you are very welcome to email me anytime with questions. Happy to help. Yeah, it's been so fun to have you, and I'm really looking forward to checking out the rest of the sessions at UPPSTART today. So hope to see you around, and talk soon. Thanks, guys.